I never expected that a regular Saturday afternoon would turn my life upside down. The sun was shining brightly, casting a warm glow over the local tennis courts, where I often watched my wife, Catherine, practice. She had taken up tennis a few months ago, and I was proud of her dedication. Little did I know that this day would reveal a truth I was not prepared for. As I leaned against the fence, sipping my iced coffee, I noticed something unusual. Catherine was laughing, genuinely laughing, with her tennis coach, Mark. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, they were just having fun on the court. But as I watched more closely, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The way she tossed her hair back and leaned in closer to him sent a chill down my spine. Then it happened. Mark reached out, playfully nudging her shoulder, and she responded with a flirtatious smile that made my stomach churn. My heart raced as I realized that this was more than just a friendly rapport. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me as the pieces began to fall into place. All those late nights at the gym, the secretive phone calls, the sudden need for privacy, it all made sense now. My wife was having an affair. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to shout and demand answers, but I froze. Instead, I stood there, paralyzed by the shock of what I was witnessing. The laughter echoed in my ears, and I felt a mix of anger and betrayal boiling inside me. How could she do this to me? How could she betray our vows so casually? As they continued their playful banter, I felt a surge of determination. I wouldn't confront her immediately, that would be too easy. No, I needed to make her feel the weight of her actions. I needed revenge. The thought of it ignited a fire within me, and I knew that I would not let this go unpunished. I turned away from the court, my mind racing with plans. I would gather evidence, spread rumors, and manipulate her world until she felt the same pain that I was feeling. This was just the beginning. I would make sure that Catherine understood the consequences of her betrayal. And I would enjoy every moment of it. As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of empowerment. I was no longer the victim, I was the one in control. The seeds of revenge had been planted, and I was ready to watch them grow. Little did I know, this path would lead to consequences I never expected. But for now, all I could think about was the satisfaction of making her pay for what she had done. The image of Catherine and Mark flirting on the tennis court burned in my mind like a brand. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that consumed me. But as the initial shock wore off, a new emotion took over, a desire for revenge. I paced around our living room, my mind racing with possibilities. I couldn't just confront Catherine directly, that would be too easy. No, I wanted her to feel the same pain and humiliation that I was experiencing. I wanted her to suffer the consequences of her actions. As I mulled over my options, a plan began to take shape. I would use her own friends against her. I would spread rumors and manipulate the truth until her world came crashing down around her. It was a devious scheme, but in my anger-fueled state, it seemed like the perfect solution. I started by reaching out to our closest friends, one by one. I painted a picture of a wife who had been unfaithful, a woman who had betrayed her husband's trust. I made sure to emphasize the details, to make it seem as real as possible. And as the rumors spread, I watched with satisfaction as Catherine's social circle began to distance themselves from her. The next step was to create a rift between Catherine and her family. I knew that her parents were traditional and would be horrified by the idea of infidelity. So I crafted a story, a tale of a wife who had strayed from the path of righteousness. I made sure that the details were just vague enough to leave room for doubt, but specific enough to plant the seeds of suspicion. As the days passed, I could see the effects of my actions taking hold. Catherine became more withdrawn, more anxious. She started making excuses to avoid social gatherings, and I could see the strain on her face whenever she spoke to her parents on the phone. It was working, my plan was unfolding perfectly. But even as I reveled in my success, a small part of me couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Was I doing the right thing? Was revenge worth sacrificing the trust and respect that had once existed between us? These thoughts nagged at me, but I pushed them aside, determined to see my plan through to the end. I knew that Catherine would eventually crack under the pressure. She would be forced to confront her own actions and the consequences they had brought upon her. And when that moment came, I would be there, ready to deliver the final blow. The thought of it filled me with a twisted sense of satisfaction, a feeling that I had never experienced before. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to manipulate the situation, to pull the strings of Catherine's world. I was the puppet master, and she was my unwitting marionette. But deep down, I knew that this path could only lead to more pain and suffering. Still, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The thirst for revenge had consumed me, and I was powerless to resist its siren call. With my plan firmly in place, I felt a sense of exhilaration coursing through me. I was ready to take the first steps in my quest for revenge. The idea of watching Catherine squirm under the weight of her own deceit was intoxicating. I knew that the best way to make her feel the repercussions of her actions was to turn her friends against her. I started with Sarah, one of Catherine's closest friends. We had always gotten along, and I knew she would be a willing ear for my carefully crafted story. I invited her over for coffee under the guise of wanting to catch up. As we settled into our usual routine of small talk, I casually dropped the bombshell. "Hey, have you noticed anything strange about Catherine lately?" I asked, feigning concern. Sarah looked puzzled, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" I leaned in closer, lowering my voice as if sharing a deep secret. "I've just been feeling uneasy. I saw her with Mark at the tennis courts the other day, and they seemed a little too friendly. I don't know, it just didn't sit right with me." The moment the words left my mouth, I felt a thrill of satisfaction. Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to concern, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. She was already processing the implications of what I had just said. "Really? I hadn't noticed anything," she replied, but I could tell that my words had planted a seed of doubt. Over the next few days, I repeated this tactic with other friends, Tom, Lisa, and even Catherine's sister, Rachel. Each time, I carefully crafted my narrative, ensuring that it was just vague enough to leave room for speculation but detailed enough to seem credible. I painted a picture of a woman who was losing her way, someone who had become entangled in a web of deceit. As the rumors began to circulate, I watched from the sidelines, feeling a twisted sense of glee. It was fascinating to see how quickly the whispers spread. Friends who had once been supportive of Catherine were now questioning her loyalty, their conversations laced with uncertainty. I could see the toll it was taking on her. Catherine became increasingly anxious, her laughter fading from our home. She would often check her phone, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for answers to questions that hadn't even been asked. I could almost hear the gears of her mind turning, trying to figure out why her friends were suddenly distant. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with Sarah. I pretended to be engrossed in a book, but I couldn't help but eavesdrop. "Is everything okay? You seem different," Sarah said, her tone laced with concern. "I don't know, Sarah. I feel like something's off. Have you heard anything?" "I just have this feeling that people are talking about me," Catherine replied, her voice tinged with anxiety. I felt a surge of satisfaction at her discomfort. The seeds of doubt I had planted were taking root, and I was beginning to see the fruits of my labor. As the days turned into weeks, I continued to observe her from a distance. The stress was palpable, Catherine was losing weight, and dark circles began to form under her eyes. I felt a mix of triumph and guilt, but I pushed those feelings aside. This was all her doing, I reminded myself. She had brought this upon herself. But deep down, I knew that the path I was walking was fraught with danger. Revenge was a double-edged sword, and I was wielding it with reckless abandon. Yet, at that moment, all I could focus on was the satisfaction of watching her unravel, a fitting consequence of her betrayal. Little did I know, the web I was weaving would ensnare more than just Catherine. The weight of the rumors was crushing Catherine, and I could see it in every interaction we had. She had become withdrawn, avoiding social gatherings and making excuses to stay home. I would catch her staring at her phone, her brow furrowed in concentration as if trying to decipher the whispers that were circulating behind her back. One evening, as we sat in silence over dinner, she finally broke the tension. "Jake, have you noticed anything strange lately? With our friends, I mean." I looked up from my plate, feigning confusion. "Strange? What do you mean?" She hesitated, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. "I don't know, it's just, they've been acting differently around me. More distant, you know? And I keep hearing these rumors, but I can't figure out where they're coming from." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers in a gesture of comfort. "Rumors? What kind of rumors?" Catherine's eyes darted away, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I don't know, just things about me and Mark. People are saying we're too close, that Something is going on between us. I squeezed her hand, my voice dripping with sympathy. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. That must be so stressful for you. Quote. She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know what to do, Jake. I feel like I'm being watched, like everyone is judging me. And Mark, he's been avoiding me too. I just want everything to go back to normal. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the tension in her body as she melted into my embrace. It's going to be okay, Catherine. We'll get through this together. But even as I comforted her, a part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. My plan was working, and Catherine was crumbling under the pressure. I knew that I should feel guilty, that I should put a stop to this madness, but the thirst for revenge was too strong. As the days passed, Catherine's panic only intensified. She became more withdrawn, spending more time alone in our bedroom, her phone glued to her hand. I would catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. One night, as I lay awake, I heard the soft click of the front door. I crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. There, in the dim streetlight, I saw Catherine hurrying down the sidewalk, her shoulders hunched as if trying to shield herself from prying eyes. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, until she returned an hour later. When she walked through the door, her eyes were red-rimmed, and her makeup was smudged. I knew, without a doubt, that she had been crying. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She jumped, startled by my presence. I just needed some air. I couldn't sleep. I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. Catherine had gone to seek comfort from someone else, someone who could provide her with the support she so desperately needed. As the days turned into weeks, I watched as Catherine's panic only intensified. She became more withdrawn, spending more time alone in our bedroom, her phone glued to her hand. I would catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. One night, as I lay awake, I heard the soft click of the front door. I crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. There, in the dim streetlight, I saw Catherine hurrying down the sidewalk, her shoulders hunched as if trying to shield herself from prying eyes. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, until she returned an hour later. When she walked through the door, her eyes were red-rimmed, and her makeup was smudged. I knew, without a doubt, that she had been crying. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She jumped, startled by my presence. I just needed some air. I couldn't sleep. I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. Catherine had gone to seek comfort from someone else, someone who could provide her with the support she so desperately needed. As the days turned into weeks, Catherine's panic only intensified. She became more withdrawn, spending more time alone in our bedroom, her phone glued to her hand. I would catch her staring out the window, lost in thought, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and shame. One night, as I lay awake, I heard the soft click of the front door. I crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. There, in the dim streetlight, I saw Catherine hurrying down the sidewalk, her shoulders hunched as if trying to shield herself from prying eyes. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, until she returned an hour later. When she walked through the door, her eyes were red-rimmed, and her makeup was smudged. I knew, without a doubt, that she had been crying. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She jumped, startled by my presence. I just needed some air. I couldn't sleep. I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth. Catherine had gone to seek comfort from someone else, someone who could provide her with the support she so desperately needed. As I watched Catherine spiral deeper into panic and isolation, a part of me felt a twinge of guilt. Had I gone too far? Was the thirst for revenge blinding me to the pain I was causing? But those thoughts were quickly pushed aside by the overwhelming sense of satisfaction I felt at seeing Catherine suffer the consequences of her actions. I knew that I needed to take things to the next level too. Drive home the point that her betrayal would not go unpunished. And that's when the idea struck me I would arrange a meeting between Catherine and her ex-boyfriend, Alex. It wasn't hard to track down Alex's contact information. He and Catherine had remained friends after their breakup, and I had always felt a twinge of jealousy whenever she would mention him. Now, that jealousy was fueling my revenge. I reached out to Alex under the guise of wanting to catch up. "Hey man, it's been a while," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. I was wondering if you'd be up for grabbing a beer sometime soon? Alex sounded surprised but agreed to meet up. We set a date and time, and I began to put my plan into motion. On the day of the meeting, I made sure to leave work early, claiming that I had a headache. Catherine was already home, curled up on the couch with a book. "Hey honey, I'm going to meet up with Alex for a drink," I said, trying to sound casual. "Do you want to come with me?" Catherine looked up, her eyes widening with surprise. "Alex? Really? I haven't seen him in ages." I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Yeah, he's in town for a few days. I figured it would be nice to catch up, you know?" Catherine hesitated for a moment, then shook her head. "No, that's okay. You two go ahead and have fun." I leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Suit yourself. I'll be back later." As I made my way to the bar, I felt a sense of excitement coursing through me. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I knew that Catherine would eventually cave to her curiosity and show up, and when she did, I would be there to witness the fallout. Sure enough, about an hour into my conversation with Alex, I spotted Catherine out of the corner of my eye. She was standing near the entrance, her eyes darting around the room nervously. I waved her over, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. "Catherine, I'm so glad you could make it," I said, pulling her into a hug. I could feel her body tense beneath my touch, and I knew that she was uncomfortable with the situation. Alex stood up, a look of surprise on his face. "Catherine? Wow, it's been too long." They exchanged awkward pleasantries, and I could see the discomfort in their body language. Catherine kept glancing at me, as if silently pleading with me to put an end to this charade. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. I kept the conversation flowing, asking probing questions about their past relationship and Catherine's current state of mind. I could see the panic rising in her eyes, and I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. As the night wore on, Catherine became increasingly agitated. She made excuses to leave, but I insisted that she stay. "Come on, honey, we're having fun," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Catherine managed to escape. She hurried out of the bar, her shoulders hunched and her head down. I watched her go, feeling a mix of triumph and disgust. I turned to Alex, who was looking at me with a mixture of confusion and concern. "What the hell was that all about?" he asked. I shrugged, feigning innocence. "What do you mean?" Alex shook his head. "That was weird, man." Catherine seemed uncomfortable. "Is everything okay between you two?" I leaned back in my chair, taking a sip of my beer. "Oh, everything's fine," I said, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "We're just going through a rough patch, that's all." But deep down, I knew that everything was not fine. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The web of lies and manipulation I had woven was starting to unravel. And I wasn't sure if I had the strength to hold it together. As I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a terrible mistake. But the thirst for revenge was still burning within me, and I knew that I couldn't stop now. I had come too far to turn back. The atmosphere in our home had shifted dramatically since the disastrous meeting with Alex. Catherine was a shadow of her former self, her anxiety palpable as she moved through the house like a ghost. I could see the toll my plan had taken on her, and part of me felt a flicker of doubt. But the other part, the part that craved revenge, was still firmly in control. That evening, I decided it was time to confront her. I could no longer stand by and watch her suffer in silence while I reveled in my twisted sense of satisfaction. I needed her to know that I was aware of everything, the affair, the lies, the manipulation. It was time to expose the truth. I waited until after dinner, when the silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Catherine sat on the couch, her eyes glued to the television but not paying attention. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. "Catherine," I said, my voice steady but laced with an underlying tension. "We need to talk." She looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "About what?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "About you and Mark." Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic flickering behind them. "What do you mean?" she stammered, trying to maintain her composure. "I mean, I know about the affair," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "I saw you two together at the tennis courts. The way you were flirting with him, it was sickening." Catherine's face paled, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. "Jake, Don't, I interrupted, my anger bubbling to the surface. Don't try to deny it. I've heard the rumors, and I've seen the way you've been acting. You've been lying to me, and you've been lying to yourself. Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, desperately trying to gather her thoughts. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was a mistake. I was feeling lost, and Mark was there for me. A mistake? I scoffed, my voice rising. You call betraying your husband a mistake? You think that's an excuse? Catherine's composure cracked, and she burst into tears. I was lonely, Jake. You were always busy with work, and I felt abandoned. Mark was just someone to talk to. It didn't mean anything. I stood up, pacing the room as her words echoed in my mind. So, you thought it was okay to seek comfort in another man? To lie to me and keep secrets? You think that's acceptable? I never wanted to hurt you. She cried, her voice breaking. I didn't know how to handle everything. I thought I could keep it under control. I stopped in my tracks, staring at her as the reality of the situation sank in. You thought you could keep it under control? You were playing with fire, Catherine, and now you're burned. She wiped her tears, her face a mask of anguish. I know I messed up, but I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if I could just find a way to feel better, everything would be okay. Feel better? I echoed, incredulous. You thought cheating on me would make you feel better? You've destroyed everything we built together. Catherine fell silent, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The weight of her actions hung heavy in the air, and I could see the realization dawning on her. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Jake, please, she pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to go this far. I'll do anything to make it right. Anything? I challenged, my heart racing. What could you possibly do to fix this? You've shattered my trust. You've betrayed me in the worst way possible. As I stood there, watching her break down, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness wash over me. I had wanted this moment, but now that it was here, it felt hollow. The satisfaction I had hoped to feel was replaced by a heavy sense of loss. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice cracking. You've hurt me in a way I never thought possible. Catherine fell silent, her eyes pleading for understanding. At that moment, I realized that the truth had been laid bare, but it hadn't brought me the closure I had expected. Instead, it left me grappling with the reality of our shattered relationship, unsure of what the future would hold. The days turned into weeks, and the fallout from the revelation of Catherine's affair continued to unfold. Our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had transformed into a cold and desolate space. Catherine was no longer the vibrant woman I had married, she was a shell of her former self, weighed down by the consequences of her actions. I watched as her friends began to distance themselves from her. Social gatherings that had once been a source of joy for Catherine became a source of dread. Invitations were no longer extended, and when they were, she could sense the underlying tension. The whispers and rumors had spread like wildfire, and it was clear that her reputation had taken a serious hit. One evening, I overheard a conversation between Catherine and her friend, Sarah, who had been one of her closest confidants. I pretended to be engrossed in a book, but I couldn't help but listen as Catherine's voice trembled with emotion. Why is everyone acting like this? She asked, her voice breaking. I thought we were friends. I thought they would understand. Catherine, it's complicated, Sarah replied, her tone hesitant. People are hurt. They feel betrayed, and it's hard for them to see you the same way. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction at her pain. She had brought this upon herself, and now she was facing the consequences of her choices. I could see the tears streaming down her face as she struggled to comprehend the reality of her situation. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Sarah admitted, her voice softening. It's going to take time. You need to give them space. Catherine hung up the phone, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I watched as she sank into the couch, her head buried in her hands. The isolation was palpable, and I could see how deeply she was affected by the loss of her friendships. It was a stark contrast to the confident woman I had once known. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed her becoming more withdrawn. She stopped going out, preferring to stay at home where she felt safe from judgment. The vibrant conversations we used to have were replaced by silence, and I could feel the weight of our strained relationship pressing down on both of us. One afternoon, I returned home from work to find Catherine sitting on the floor of our living room, surrounded by old photographs. I hesitated at the doorway, watching as she flipped through the pictures of happier times, as at the beach, laughing with friends, celebrating milestones. Each image seemed to cut deeper, a painful reminder of what we had lost. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt so alone." I took a deep breath, my heart conflicted. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but the other part reveled in her suffering. "You made your choices, Catherine. You had to live with them." Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I know. I just wish I could take it all back. I never thought it would come to this." I felt a surge of anger at her words. She had the power to choose, and she had chosen betrayal. "This is the consequence of your actions. You can't expect everything to go back to normal just because you're sorry." Catherine's shoulders shook as she cried, and I felt a pang of guilt. But it was quickly overshadowed by the satisfaction of seeing her in pain. She had destroyed our marriage, and now she was facing the fallout of her decisions. Days turned into weeks, and the isolation continued to take its toll. Catherine's friends remained distant, and I could see the loneliness etched into her features. She had lost not only my trust but also the support system she had relied on for so long. As I watched her suffer, I felt a mix of emotions swirling within me: anger, satisfaction, and a hint of sadness. The woman I had loved was slipping away, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was a part of me that still cared. But the desire for revenge was stronger. I had wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, and now I was witnessing the consequences unfold before my eyes. She was alone, abandoned, and broken, and I couldn't deny the twisted sense of satisfaction that came with it. In the end, I knew that our relationship was beyond repair. The trust had been shattered, and the love that once bound us was now replaced by resentment and pain. I had wanted her to suffer, and now she was alone in her misery, facing the consequences of her actions. As the weeks turned into months, the aftermath of Catherine's affair continued to weigh heavily on both of us. The once vibrant and loving relationship we had shared had been reduced to a shell of its former self, replaced by a cold and distant silence that permeated every corner of our home. I had gotten what I wanted: to see Catherine suffer the consequences of her betrayal. I watched as her friends and family distanced themselves, leaving her isolated and alone. The guilt and shame that consumed her were palpable, and I took a twisted sense of satisfaction in her misery. But as time passed, the thrill of revenge began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. I found myself questioning whether I had gone too far and whether my actions had been justified. The woman I saw before me was a shadow of the Catherine the first had fallen in love with, and a part of me couldn't help but feel responsible for her downfall. One evening, as I sat alone in our living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The house felt empty, devoid of the warmth and laughter that had once filled it. I thought back to the days before the affair when we had been happy, when our love had seemed unbreakable. I thought about the countless hours I had spent plotting my revenge, the careful manipulation of her world, and the satisfaction I had felt in watching her crumble. But now, that satisfaction had turned to ash in my mouth, leaving behind a bitter taste of regret. I thought about the friends she had lost, the family that had turned their backs on her, and the loneliness that consumed her every waking moment. Had I been too harsh? Had I taken my revenge too far? The questions swirled in my mind, tormenting me with their lack of answers. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, Catherine emerged from the bedroom, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of despair and resignation, and I felt my heart break. "Jake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I felt so alone, and Mark was there for me. I know that's no excuse, but it's the truth." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. What could I say? That I forgave her? That everything would be okay? The truth was, I didn't know. "I know," I replied, my voice heavy with emotion. "I know you're sorry, Catherine. But that doesn't change what happened." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know. I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could go back to the way things were before." I reached out, taking her hand in mine. It felt strange and foreign, after so many months of distance and resentment. "I wish I could too, Catherine. But the truth is, we can't. We have to move forward, somehow." She looked up at me, her eyes shining with hope. "Do you think we can? Can we ever get back what we lost?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Part of me wanted to say yes, to believe that we could rebuild what we had once had. But another part of me knew that the damage was too deep, the trust too broken. I don't know, Catherine, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I want to believe we can, but I'm not sure. All I know is that we have to try. As I spoke those words, I realized that my quest for revenge had only served to deepen the pain and suffering that we both felt. I had wanted to see Catherine suffer, to feel the weight of her betrayal, but in doing so, I had only succeeded in destroying the very thing I had fought so hard to protect, our love. At that moment, I knew that I had to let go of my anger, my resentment, and my desire for revenge. It was time to move forward, to try and rebuild what we had lost, even if the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges. The weight of my inner conflict hung over me like a dark cloud, and I knew I couldn't carry it alone any longer. I needed to talk to someone who could offer a fresh perspective, someone who could help me navigate the tangled mess of emotions I was feeling. So, I reached out to my closest friend, Mark. We had known each other for years, and I trusted him to give me honest advice, even if it was hard to hear. We decided to meet at our favorite bar, a cozy place with dim lighting and a relaxed atmosphere. As I walked in, I spotted Mark sitting at the bar, nursing a drink. He looked up and smiled, but I could see the concern etched on his face. "Hey, man," he said as I took a seat next to him. "You look like you've been through the ringer. What's going on?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "It's Catherine. Things have been rough since I found out about her affair." Mark nodded, his expression turning serious. "I figured as much. How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the weight of my emotions crashing down on me. Part of me is still angry, and I wanted her to suffer for what she did. But now, I just feel lost. I don't know if I can forgive her, and I don't know how to move forward. Mark took a sip of his drink. Considering my words, "Have you talked to her about how you feel?" I shook my head. "We've had some conversations, but it always ends up in tears. I just can't shake the feeling that she betrayed me, and I wanted her to feel the pain of that betrayal." "Jake," Mark said gently, "I get that you're hurt, and you have every right to be. But dwelling on revenge isn't going to help you heal. It's only going to keep you stuck in this cycle of anger and resentment." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "But she deserves to feel the consequences of her actions. She hurt me." "Of course she does," Mark replied, his tone firm but compassionate. "But think about it. Is this really who you want to be? Do you want to be the guy who revels in someone else's pain? It sounds like you're letting her actions define how you feel and how you live your life." His words struck a chord within me. I had been so focused on punishing Catherine that I hadn't considered the toll it was taking on my well-being. "So what do I do? Just forgive her and pretend like everything is fine?" "Not necessarily," Mark said, shaking his head. "Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget what happened or that you have to go back to the way things were. It means you're choosing to let go of the anger and pain that's consuming you. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of revenge." I took a deep breath, contemplating his words. "But how do I even begin to do that?" "Start by being honest with her about how you feel," Mark advised. "Tell her you're hurt, but also tell her that you want to find a way to move forward. It might not be easy, but it's a step toward healing." I nodded slowly, feeling a flicker of hope. "You think it's possible to rebuild what we had?" "I do," Mark said with a reassuring smile. "But it's going to take time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable. You both need to be committed to making it work. And remember, it's okay to take things one step at a time." As we continued to talk, I felt the weight on my shoulders begin to lift. Mark's perspective opened my eyes to the possibility of healing and moving forward. I didn't have to remain trapped in my desire for revenge. I could choose a different path, one that allowed for growth and understanding. By the time I left the bar, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I was ready to confront Catherine, not with anger, but with honesty and a desire to rebuild. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew it was the right choice. It was time to let go of the past and start looking toward the future. As I made my way home from my conversation with Mark, I felt a newfound sense of clarity and purpose. The weight of my inner turmoil had lifted, and I knew that it was time to let go of my desire for revenge. It had brought me no satisfaction, only a deepening of the pain and suffering that had consumed both Catherine and myself. When I walked through the door, Catherine was sitting on the couch, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked up at me, a glimmer of hope in her gaze. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I know I've hurt you, and I understand if you can't forgive me. But I want you to know that I'm here whenever you're ready to talk. I crossed the room and sat down next to her, taking her hand in mine. It felt strange, unfamiliar, after so many months of distance and resentment. Catherine, I said, my voice soft and sincere. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize that my desire for revenge has only made things worse. It hasn't brought me any satisfaction, only more pain. She squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with tears. I'm so sorry, Jake. I never meant to hurt you. I was lost, and I made a terrible mistake. But I want to make things right, if you'll let me. I nodded, taking a deep breath. I know, Catherine, and I want to try, too. But it's going to take time, and it's not going to be easy. We have a lot of healing to do. She moved closer to me, resting her head on my shoulder. I know, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, Jake, and I can't imagine my life without you. As we sat there together, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. It wasn't going to be a quick fix, and there would undoubtedly be challenges ahead. But at that moment, I knew that I had made the right choice. I had let go of my desire for revenge, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the burden of anger and resentment that had been weighing me down. In the days and weeks that followed, we took things slowly. We went to counseling, worked on rebuilding trust, and learned to communicate openly and honestly with one another. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when we wanted to give up. But we persevered, driven by a shared desire to heal and move forward. As time passed, I began to see glimpses of the Catherine the first had fallen in love with. Her laughter returned, and the light in her eyes began to shine once more. Our friends and family slowly began to welcome her back into the fold, and I could see the weight of her guilt and shame lifting. As for me, I found that letting go of my desire for revenge had freed me in ways I never could have imagined. I no longer felt consumed by anger and resentment, and I was able to focus on the present and the future rather than dwelling on the past. It wasn't a perfect solution, and there were still moments when the pain of the past threatened to overwhelm us. But we faced those challenges together, as a team, and we emerged stronger for it. We had learned that forgiveness was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to the power of love and resilience. As I look back on that time now, I realize that it was a turning point in our relationship. We had been through hell and back, but we had emerged on the other side, our love stronger and more resilient than ever before. And I know that no matter what challenges lie ahead, we will face them together, hand in hand, with a renewed sense of purpose and a deep appreciation for the gift of second chances. As Catherine and I continued to work on rebuilding our relationship, I found myself slowly emerging from the darkness of the past. The weight of the betrayal and the desire for revenge had lifted, and in its place, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and a desire to move forward. One day, as I was sitting in my office, staring out the window, I realized that I needed to make some changes in my life. I had spent so much time and energy focused on Catherine's affair and my quest for revenge that I had neglected my own needs and interests. I decided to start small, by picking up an old hobby that I had once loved: photography. I dusted off my camera and began to explore the city, capturing the beauty and energy that surrounded me. It was a form of therapy, a way to clear my mind and focus on the present moment. As I immersed myself in my photography, I began to meet new people who shared my passion. We would gather on weekends for photo walks, exploring hidden corners of the city and sharing tips and techniques. It was a refreshing change of pace, and I found myself looking forward to these outings more and more. But it wasn't just photography that brought me joy. I also began to explore other interests that I had long neglected: reading, hiking, and even taking a cooking class. It was as if I was rediscovering myself, peeling back the layers of pain and resentment that had defined me for so long. As I focused on my growth and development, I found that my relationship with Catherine was also beginning to heal. We continued to attend counseling sessions, and we made a conscious effort to communicate openly and honestly with one another. It wasn't always easy, but we were both committed to making it work. One day, as we were walking through the park, hand in hand, Catherine turned to me and said, "Jake, I'm so proud of you. You've come so far, and I'm grateful to be on this journey with you." I squeezed her hand, feeling a surge of love and gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Catherine. We've been through so much, but we're stronger for it." As we continued our walk, I couldn't help but reflect on how far we had come. It had been a long and difficult road, But we had emerged on the other side, our love stronger and more resilient than ever before. And as I looked to the future, I felt a sense of excitement and possibility. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them head on. I was no longer defined by the pain of the past but by the hope and promise of the future. In the months that followed, I continued to immerse myself in my new hobbies and interests, finding joy and fulfillment in the simple pleasures of life. I made new friends, traveled to new places, and discovered a sense of inner peace that I hadn't felt in years. And as for Catherine and me, we continued to grow and evolve together. We celebrated our triumphs and weathered our storms, always with the knowledge that we were in it for the long haul. We had been through hell and back, but we had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. As I look back on this journey, I realized that it was not just a story of revenge and redemption, but a testament to the power of love and resilience. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is always hope for a fresh start, a chance to begin again. And so, I embrace this new chapter of my life, filled with possibility and promise. I am no longer the man I was before, but a better, stronger version of myself. And I know that whatever challenges lie ahead, I will face them with courage, with grace, and with the knowledge that I am not alone.